Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. I hope everyone can hear me. Thank you all for logging into the Sikh Research Institute webinar today. My name is Gurvinder Singh and I'll be host for today's session, and Narendra Singh will be moderating. The presentation will begin shortly, but before we get started, I wanted to review a few housekeeping items and let you know how we can participate in today's event. Narendra Singh will then provide some information about Sikh Research Institute and Amardeep Singh before handing over for the main presentation. So what we are looking at today is an example of GoToWebinar attendee interface, which is made up of two parts. The viewer's side window is on the left, which allows you to see everything the presenter will share on their screen. And the control panel is on the right. Within that control panel is how you can participate in today's events. So let's take a look at that. By clicking on the orange arrow, you can open and close your control panel. And from the view menu, you can also set the control panel not to auto hide when inactive if you prefer to keep it always open. The audio pane provides some audio information. By default, you have joined the webinar via mic and speakers. Click Audio Setup to select your computer speaker or headset devices. If you prefer, you can also join the audio via telephone by selecting Use Telephone, and the dial-in information will be displayed, including your audio pin. During the presentation, if you have any questions, you can send them to the moderator through the questions pane. Simply type your question and click Send. Amardeep Singh will be answering all questions during the Q&A session at the end of the main presentation. As a reminder, today's webinar is being recorded and everyone will receive an email via 7 days with a link to today's event. If for any reason you experience any technical difficulties during the session and you cannot see the main presentation, for example, please do not hesitate to contact me via the chat panel, which is Sikh Research Institute. If you lose your internet connection or have to restart your computer during the session, you can always rejoin the session by clicking on the URL that is included in your original registration confirmation email. Finally, at the end of the presentation, Amardeep Singh will launch a testimonial and feedback window, and we'd appreciate it if you could take a few moments to provide your feedback and comments on how the session went and how we can improve future sessions. Now I'll hand over to Narendra Singh, who will provide some background to Sikh Research Institute and also Amardeep Singh. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. My name is Narendra Singh and I will be the moderator for today's session. We are delighted to have you with us. Let me share a bit about the Sikh Research Institute, or SikhRI. Over the last 7 years, SikhRI focused on community development through programs. Leadership programs developing visionaries trained 3,000 worldwide. Educational seminars stopping misinformation reached 300,000 globally. K-12 services teaching values and language skills served 41 schools, 500 teachers, and 1,700 students. We ask for your financial support to continue this work, so please donate by visiting us on the web at www.sikhri.org. Thank you. Let us begin our session today. Your instructor will be Amardeep Singh. Amardeep Singh is a co-founder and current director of programs at the Sikh Coalition. He has represented dozens of Sikh victims of airport profiling, employment discrimination, and hate crimes since after 9/11. He has been quoted speaking on Sikh rights issues in the New York Times, Washington Post, and CNN. Over the past year, Amar was appointed by President Barack Obama to the White House Advisory Commission on Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. He was also named Best Lawyer Under 40 this year by the National Asian Pacific American Bar Association. He sits on the Board of Directors of the South Asian Bar Association of New York and the Board of Trustees of the Hoboken Public Library. It is my pleasure to give you Amardeep Singh. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. I am going to try to show you my screen, and I think I have it here. Let's see. Okay, yeah, let me just, give me a second, show clean. Okay. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. I just wanted to thank Sikh Research Institute and everyone participating today for just giving me a platform on which to share some of thoughts I have on the external threats to our Guru Bestowed identity. I've been at this work full-time for the Sikh Coalition for 7 years now, and I definitely have a lot of thoughts, and I'm sure as a Panth and the participants have thoughts too on some of the challenges and ways to go forward. I'm going to apologize at the beginning in case my presentation might be interpreted by some as a bit negative or pessimistic. It's not meant to be. It's really a presentation that lays out what the current challenges are, and then at the end presents some ideas for thought and consideration on ways to move forward. But please don't think of me as a pessimist. I'm actually an optimist, but I'm also a realist as to the challenges that those who maintain our identity have. So with that, I'll begin. So in terms of an overview of the presentation, I will discuss quickly the scope of this presentation, and then I'll get to the heart of the presentation, which are the direct threats, and then I'll talk about the larger systemic gaps that cause these threats to our Guru Bestowed identity, and then I'll discuss ways to move forward as a Panth. And I'm having trouble moving to the next slide. Here we go. Okay. So the scope of the presentation, I'm going to be discussing the external threats to our identity. Keep in mind the internal threats are our own individual commitments to the Guru, internal divisions we have in the community, whether it's in Gurdwara or in politics. These internal threats are outside the scope of what I'll discuss. And I'll finally just end this scope of the presentation slide by saying that the work of the Sikh Coalition, which is essentially defending the right to be Sikh for those who choose to be Sikh, is very complementary to that of SRI. I always say that what use is the Sikh Coalition defending people's right to be Sikh if people don't want to be Sikh? And the work of SRI gets to this question of encouraging people to adopt Guru Sahib's way of life and be true to the Guru Bestowed identity. So one of the first threats is a threat to a pillar of Sikhism, which is the idea of Kirtkamai, or earning an honest living. And what I've found through my work with the Sikh Coalition, and this shouldn't be a surprise to anyone, is that those who maintain Guru Sahib's Bana have been denied opportunities to maintain an honest living in some instances, and some of them are quite prominent instances. So for example, though we know that Sikhs through our out history have served as perhaps the world's bravest soldiers, the United States military continues to reject Sikhs who want to maintain their Bana. They've made a few exceptions that the Sikh Coalition has fought for, and the people pictured here, Specialist Simranjit Singh Lamba and Captains Kamaljeet Singh Khalsi and Captain Tejdeep Ratan are the first Sikhs to be given exceptions to the rule that Sikhs are generally rejected, but those are just exceptions. The policy of rejecting Sikhs in the military still remains. And I'd like people to keep in mind that the U.S. military is America's most prominent, largest employer, private or public sector, and the fact that the largest employer in the United States could irrationally discriminate against Sikhs as a general policy just sets the wrong tone for other segments of society. Next, just again from this year, we had a Sikh named Liv-Protecting Singh who was denied a job at a Lexus dealership unless he removed his beard, Dari. You know, in that case, Gurpreet had gone through a training and was told that he had passed amongst 16 people, was at the top of the class in terms of passing all the training tests, but then was asked about his, interestingly not about his dastar, but about his beard, and was told that he would need to trim it. And when he relayed that he couldn't trim his beard, that he maintains it unshorn as per his Sikh faith, he was not given a job. And that matter is the subject of a lawsuit in federal court in New Jersey. Next, just again from this year, a gentleman named Frank Singh who decided to adopt Sikhism this year and started growing his gesh and then started tying a dastar, was fired from a job at AutoZone, which provides sort of basic auto parts and even some auto repairs. It's franchises all over the U.S. He was ridiculed by not only management and his fellow employees, being called Taliban and terrorist and the like, but even when customers would start ridiculing him, his fellow employees would take part. Eventually he was just told, look, don't come back to work with that on, meaning referring to as the star, and then he was fired this year. And again, this matter is the subject of litigation lawsuit in federal court in Massachusetts. Next, I'd note that we have a series of cases, and we haven't publicized this yet to the community, but a series of Sikh truckers in California have been denied jobs unless they remove their gesh for drug testing. And we've made the arguments here that, one, obviously a Sikh can't remove their gesh, but second, that drug testing can be done through a urinalysis or other means other than requiring one to remove their gesh. We're convinced that the employer in this case just doesn't want to hire Sikhs, and that's why these people have, there's been a refusal to hire, and you might hear about a lawsuit in that matter sometime over the next two to 3 months, is my guess, is when it'll take us to prepare the evidence and file the proper papers. So these are basically the threats to a Sikh's livelihood, and as you can see, they're quite widespread throughout the country. Very prominent national employers like Lexus, AutoZone, the U.S. military, in these cases employers that employ literally tens of thousands of people feel free to discriminate against Sikhs in a way that's unfair and unjust. Equal educational opportunity. Perhaps this is the most troubling trend that we see at the Sikh Coalition, particularly over the last 5 years. Just this year, last month, we issued a report where we surveyed over 1,000 Sikhs in the San Francisco Bay Area, and we found that 69% of our children, because they maintain Guru Sahib's Bana, are teased and harassed in school. 69%. And I think that number is high enough to sort of attach the word epidemic to the problem. In 2008, the Sikh Coalition did a similar report in New York City and found that we'd surveyed again over 1,000 Sikhs and found that over 60% of our children were either verbally or physically abused in school. Again, attaching the word epidemic I don't think is engaging in exaggeration. If 60% of the population had some sort of disease or illness, we would call it an epidemic. So literally these are epidemics of bias and harassment against our children because they maintain the Sikh way of life. And then of course I have these 4 horrible examples of when everything goes wrong. This is what could happen. Some of you might know that in 2008 a gentleman named Liv-Protecting Singh was in high school, and there was a outside assembly, and another student took a lighter and lit his patka on fire. Luckily, the fire was put out before he had any major damage, just some burning, but his patka was lit on fire. In New York City, a girl named Gurpreet, 2008, hurt by another student who had threatened to cut the ball his Jurda, and ultimately Harpal Singh is a boy in 2007 whose hair was cut by another student, and sadly his hair was actually put in a toilet and flushed, and you know the boy who did this to him was prosecuted for and convicted of a hate crime. In 2000, a boy named Jagmohan Singh, he was fractured at a student who first pulled off his patka and then punched him, and these students had been punching and harassing him for the whole school year, and he finally had his face fractured in June of 2009. So again, those who wear Guru Sahib's bana do have significant threats as a result, and sadly in this case it's our children who are suffering for maintaining the bana that Guru Sahib bestowed on us. Carrying the kirpan, I think as Sikhs we all are commanded and to take Amrit, and it's what every Sikh aspires to join the Khalsa Panth. And sadly, I would say in the United States that there are very few places in the United States where a Sikh can fully enjoy the great pleasure there should be in taking Amrit. You should know that over the last 10 years, the Sikh Coalition has taken on over 24 cases where Sikhs have been the subject of criminal prosecution, meaning you can go to jail for carrying a kirpan. Now with Waheguru's Kirpa, we've been able to get the charges dismissed in those cases. But the fact that a Sikh is simply that the kirpan in the workplace for those who've taken Amrit has at times presented a problem. We're currently litigating a case in Houston, Texas, involving a woman named Kavaljit Kaur. And Kaval wanted to carry to work simply a 3-inch kirpan, not sharp, on a gatra underneath her clothes, and she was fired for doing so, despite the fact that there are scissors, letter openers, and knives in her workplace that are sharper and more capable of creating harm than her kirpan, and are freely accessible, unlike her kirpan, to anyone who enters that building and works there. So we've been litigating that case since 2005 in federal court in Houston, Texas, and we're hoping for a good result, and because it'll be literally the first case that's been decided in the whole United States on a kirpan in the workplace. And given that it's a federal building that she used to work in, the stakes are very high, so we're hoping for a good result there. But as of now, you can't carry your kirpan in the federal building. So for example, let's say you need to get Social Security benefits or any other type of government benefits, or interact with the U.S. government in any way in any federal building, and you're an Amritdhari, you're not supposed to be carrying your kirpan, which is obviously very troubling that the Sikhs we're most proud of have trouble, carrying all their Kakars. And then finally, of course, as most of us know, that Sikhs who've taken Amrit and carry their Kakars must part with their kirpan on schools and airplanes. And I think what's troubling from our perspective with that, particularly in a school context, is that most schools have objects that are extremely dangerous if used with malintent. And those objects, some of the same ones I mentioned before, scissors, baseball bats, and the like, are more dangerous than a kirpan, yet they're allowed. It doesn't make any sense. So that's basically, I think, in some of the external threats to those who we're so proud of taking Amrit, but cannot carry their kirpan, many places in American life. Law enforcement scrutiny of Sikhs. We've learned since 9/11 that the mere act of maintaining our bana causes government officers to search us, perhaps unfairly. And this year was a bad year in that regard. Just 2 months ago or so, the TSA, the Transportation Security Administration, announced that rather than discretionary searches, meaning the screener at an airport has discretion over whether to do an extra search of a Sikh star, those searches are now mandatory. So no matter have metal detecting wand put over it's from our perspective, as we've as a country, the United States has learned more about the ways in which people who would do harm on airplanes. We learned on December 2009 that Christmas December 2009 that the bomber who tried to bomb an airplane that was on its way to Detroit, Michigan, did so by secreting explosives in his undergarments. So, if explosives can fit in that tight an area, it sort of doesn't make sense to then give special scrutiny to the star. And of course, when it's the government doing it, it sends a wrong message to the rest of society. It sends a message to the rest of society is that we are particularly worried about the star in particular. Maybe you should be too. And of course, it sends a wrong message to fellow passengers. So our position's always been, if you're going to engage in an extra search of the star, you have to have a good reason for doing so, and we're not convinced that that reason exists. I'd also add, and this is an issue that hasn't received a lot of attention publicly, but it's an issue that definitely definitely has come up in our office. We've noticed that Sikh truckers tend to get pulled over by highway police without cause, and we say without cause because they're not given a ticket. They're just pulled over and questioned. In a few instances, those truckers who are Amritari will get pulled over. They won't get a ticket for breaking any law, but then they'll get a ticket because they're carrying a kirpan, in which case we'll note that, okay, you stopped him illegitimately in the first place. But I note that those Sikhs who drive trucks seem to be getting extra scrutiny by highway police. And as the Sikh Coalition and other Sikh groups build more resources, I'd love for us to dig deeper on that issue. And then finally, of course, with regard to law enforcement scrutiny, we pretty much know, based on the cases we get to the Sikh Coalition, that it's when an officer detects that a Sikh is carrying a kirpan, more often than not, they tend to be either arrested or given a ticket, which is very troubling, and another example of how merely the act of being a Sikh and maintaining our bana can be cause for one to be literally arrested in the case of those who carry the kirpan. I'm just waiting for the next slide. Okay, here it is. Physical violence against Sikhs. Again, comes as no surprise to anyone who's aware of some of the issues the Sikhs have faced since 9/11. But sometimes our bana, particularly after terrorist attacks and the like, causes Sikhs to be the victims of physical violence. This year, some of the more egregious incidents involved, in September, and this says in Sacramento, but it's actually in Seattle. A Sikh store owner was very badly beaten by someone who was calling him Al-Qaeda and the like. Similarly, in Sacramento, in November, a Sikh cab driver was very badly beaten in Sacramento, and severely beaten. And then in Texas, in 2009 December, a Sikh pizza delivery man was almost drowned to death by people who basically he was delivering a pizza and the customers threw him into a pool and wouldn't let him out and were using all sorts of derogatory language towards him until after about 20 minutes of continually pushing him back into the pool as he tried to get out, they finally let him out and he escaped with his life. One thing I wanted to note about all three of the cases I just mentioned now, all three of the people, the store owner, the cab driver, and the pizza delivery man, work in spaces where they don't have control over customer flow. So the store owner can't control who walks into a store, the cab driver can't control who walks into his cab, and the pizza delivery man has no control over whose house he goes to deliver a pizza. And so people in those jobs we've found where there's little control over customer flow, and you tend to be confined to a certain space if you're a cab driver or a store owner and can't leave that space if there's danger or have difficulty leaving it. Those are the Sikhs who tend to be the most vulnerable in the workplace. And of course, when there are terrorist attacks or other tensions overseas, those are the times where we're particularly vigilant about Sikhs in those particular workspaces being the victims of violence. The gaps that allow for this harm that I've gone over, where you know, you could not get a job because of you're wearing your bana. Your kids might be harassed in school because they're wearing the bana. If you take Amrit, you can't carry your kirpan. You might be the subject of physical violence by private actors, or you might be the subject of profiling by law enforcement. How does all this happen? Well, it's not a mistake that it actually happens. There's a legal and policy system that allows for gaps that, as it pertains to Sikhs, are widespread and significant. One of the gaps I'd first note is federal case law, which allows Sikhs and other minority workers to be segregated and put out of public view as a result of corporate image policies. And the case I'm thinking of in particular is called Verdi versus United Airlines. Now, in that case, a Sikh wanted to serve as a ticket agent for United Airlines, wanted to literally just punch people's tickets, put them on the right flight when they approached the counter at the United Airlines in O'Hare Airport in Chicago. And United Airlines said, you know, the star is outside of our uniform policy. You know what? We'll give you a job with the same pay and same benefits, but it'll be outside of public view. And a federal court in Chicago, and this decision was affirmed by the Court of Appeals and denied review by the U.S. Supreme Court. A federal court in Chicago ruled that because the employer offered the same pay and benefits, even though the gentleman had to work in the back, there was no actual quote-unquote injury. So the court really had an economic analysis to the quote-unquote injury here. But you know, the real injury is that we're being segregated. We're being put out of public view, and that's part of our problem as a community, that the fact that we are sort of being not in the public view and people don't know us often leads to discrimination, and one of the ways to remedy that is to make sure that we can be in the public and participating in the mechanics of society, including working as a ticket agent at United Airlines. But federal case law had a very similar ruling in a case involving a Muslim woman who wears a hijab, who worked for an Alamo Rent-A-Car in Massachusetts. Same ruling. Alamo hadn't discriminated against her because she was offered the same pay and benefits even though she had to work in the back. So the case law allows for this sort of what I would argue is ridiculous segregation out of public view. So that's a big gap that as a community we're going to have to address over the years. Similarly, with regard to federal law when it comes to school harassment, religion is not one of the enumerated protected categories that federal law protects when it comes to school harassment. So for example, if you're harassed in school on the basis of your race, on the basis of your national origin, on the basis of your ethnicity. Those are all instances where the federal government can come in and help you and take on your case and make sure the school has procedures that would stop such harassment. Religion, interestingly enough, is not one of the protected categories, and obviously that's a huge, 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 huge gap for Sikhs who are really, as I've gone over, suffering. Our kids are suffering in school in ways that many parents are not aware of, but they are suffering. Next, profiling and government scrutiny. Again, interestingly, the federal regulations that guide all federal agencies on the issue of profiling, it's called the Department of Justice of Guidance on Profiling. It specifically does not include religion as a protected category. So if the TSA, the funny thing is, the Sikh Coalition and other Sikh groups will say the TSA is engaging in profiling, and that's wrong. But you know what? That's a moral argument, because legally it's completely legal. If the TSA wants to sort of say we are profiling on the basis of religion, their regulations allow them to do so. If the TSA says the only reason that we're stopping you is because you're Muslim or you look Muslim to us, that is completely lawful under the way the current anti-profiling regulations are put forth by the federal government. So that is, obviously a huge gap that allows our community to, in 2010 now, have our stars checked in an extra way every single time we go to the airport. Next, when it comes to hate crimes, there is a federal hate crime statistics act that tracks hate crimes against certain categories of people, and of course the idea behind the Statistics Act is that you can't understand a problem unless you have good data on the problem, and you can't address a problem unless you have good data on a problem. Well, guess what? Though we know that Sikhs suffer hate crimes significantly and have in the past and could in the future, if when there are terrorist attacks that lead to these types of hate crimes, there's no federal law requiring that there be any tracking of hate crimes against Sikhs in particular. And so the federal government doesn't even have a way of measuring whether anti-Sikh violence or violence that affects Sikhs is an issue. And then finally, with regard to the Kirpan, unlike Great Britain, where the criminal law has a specific enumerated exemption that says, you know what, if you're carrying something that could be deemed a knife, but you're a Sikh and it's a Kirpan, it's lawful, the United States has no such law. And the result is that basically any Sikh who carries a Kirpan is always in danger if their Kirpan is detected, if they're wearing it underneath their clothes, of arrest. So these gaps are huge. They're significant, and they lead to the dynamic that I've discussed over the last few slides. These threats to those who maintain the Guru bestowed Sikh identity. But let me say this. What I just went over were the legal gaps. I would say that the systemic gaps, what we don't have as a community, what we haven't built as a Sikh community, are even more troubling. Because I think unless we address these systemic gaps, we will never get to these issues in the legal system and the policy system that make it difficult to be a Sikh. And what are the systemic gaps? One, I would argue, based on experience, that the Sikh organizations that are out there working on these issues are severely underfunded. The Sikh Coalition is by far the largest Sikh organization in the United States. We have 3 offices, the most paid staff. We have 10 full-time staff members. People have given up careers in the private sector to do this work full-time. And our budget is $900,000. That's how we pay for our rent, for our staff salaries, for all overhead and travel associated with doing this work. But when I compare it with our colleagues who are engaged in the same fights as us, for example, the American Jewish Congress, their budget was $56 million. The NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, their budget is $35 million. So really, when we're talking about the resources we have to address this issue, we're comparing apples to oranges. Our friends who engage in this fight in the Jewish community and the African American community of course, are going to be heard more than us because they just have more resources to be heard. Second, there's no Sikh political action committee. I don't know if people know what a political action committee is, but it's more commonly known as a PAC. And what PACs do is they collect funds and then distribute those funds to politicians who are either friendly, or if they're not friendly, they don't distribute to them. But it's a way for a community or a particular interest to award or punish decision makers in government who are friendly or not friendly. Interestingly enough, even though we've been in this country for more than 100 years, there still is no Sikh PAC, and that's a huge systemic gap. No community that has any power in this country to affect their destiny is without a PAC, if not multiple PACs. In addition, we have no Sikh what's called a 501c4 under IRS regulations. That's an organization that has no restrictions on lobbying. The Sikh Coalition and the other Sikh orgs that are out there that work on this issue are all what's called 501c3s. And a 501c3 can only spend no more than 30% of its time lobbying, lest they, without the pain of losing their tax-exempt status. And so in order to maintain our tax-exempt status, we can only spend no more than 30% of our time and funds lobbying. Unfortunately, there's no Sikh organization out there that's a 501c4 that does not have these restrictions on lobbying. And again, that's a huge gap, huge gap in addressing some of the issues that I've gone over. And then, of course, we have no Sikhs who are running for political office in this country. And I think, many Sikhs are under the mistaken impression that we can't be elected if we run. And that's just not true. I have a little brother who lives in the same town as me, Hoboken. Our town is Hoboken, New Jersey. Our town is more than 90% white. Asians, forget South Asians, Asians make up less than 0.2% of our town. My brother ran for political office a year ago. He ran for, there were 3 open seats on our city council and 12 people were running. And of the 12 people, he received the most votes in town. So, it is possible to do these things, but you need organization and you need people who are willing to go ahead and do it. And we have no sort of organization out there that's encouraging people in our community to register to vote and then also themselves to run for office. And it's a huge gap. Any community that is going to have a voice to affect its destiny in this country will have an organization that makes sure people are registering to vote and make sure that people are running for political office. Even if you run for political office and lose, it creates a ripple effect in how decision makers look at your community, because even if you get 100 votes, they think that's 100 votes attached to that community that I'd like. And then finally, the other systemic gap that's really huge is education. Not only do most people in America not know who Sikhs are, but we as a community have not even measured the extent of the ignorance. Like, I don't know, and I can't say, and I don't think anyone who's listening to this webinar can say with certainty what percentage of the American population doesn't know who Sikhs are, what don't they know about us, what do they think of the star, what do they know about the star, what do they know about the founders. We just don't know because we've never done that sort of level of deeper engagement, polling, testing to get a sense of the extent of the problem that we need to address. Many of the issues that or perhaps all the issues I've discussed today could be solved if people understood who Sikhs are. So these are the gaps, the sort of the systemic gaps beyond the legal and policy gaps. I think as a community, if we address these systemic gaps, we'll have a much better chance of getting to the legal gaps. So finally, I go to my last slide, which is a way to move forward, which I hope is hopefully will lead to good discussions. And questions from people and good ideas. One, I believe there has to be a massive investment in organizations like the Sikh Coalition that fight for the right to be Sikh over the next 10 years. Otherwise, we'll continue to do what we've been doing, which is winning a lot of important battles. But at the end of the day, what we're mostly doing is fighting fires. I always say that my goal in my time with the Sikh Coalition is to slowly put the lawyers out of business and then slowly start closing offices, because that's when I know we'll be winning. And in this regard, I note that some of my my colleagues over the last 10 years at the Anti-Defamation League, it's the Jewish sort of version of the Sikh Coalition, have been closing offices or laying off staff over the last 5 years because many of the fights that need to be fought have already been fought and won. And so the need for the organization doesn't exist in the way that it existed before. That's what we need to be moving toward, but it's not going to happen without a massive investment from the community. And the sort of, Guru Sahib would ask Sikhs not to visit him unless they were bringing swords and arms, and we need more arms to fight these fights. Institutions separate than the Sikh Coalition, separate than many of the other organizations out there that can help Sikhs run for all, that can hire like a 501c4, that can punish and reward politicians, like the ACT, the Political Action Committee that I mentioned. This instinct in this bullet is actually non-existent. Non-existent. Sort of you wonder, like, how are we going to get out of these troubles? Well, we need to create these institutions as the first step, much less make them strong. And then finally, we're going to need a massive investment in educational work. It is going to take, my guess is, perhaps decades, 1 to 2 to 3 decades, to change the popular notion that turban equals terrorist to turban equals great neighbor. But that's going to require dedicated support and investment from the community, and we're just not there yet. We're really at our infantile stage of addressing some of the issues that I've gone over and we've identified during our work over the last 10 years at the Sikh Coalition. So with that, I'll say thank you for hearing me out and considering what I had to say today. If I've said anything wrong, I take full responsibility for that. And I just really look forward to people's questions and their thoughts on ways to move forward. I'm ready to listen and I'm ready to learn. So thank you very much for hearing me out. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. This is Narinder Pal. I'm waiting for some of the questions to trickle in, and thank you, Amardeep Singh Virji, for an excellent presentation. To start things off, I just sort of have my own few questions, and while I wait for the attendees to send theirs. You are now a member of the White House Advisory Commission on Asian Americans, and you were appointed by President Barack Obama himself. And President Barack Obama is not known to be, at least he doesn't, in the media, is not seen to be a great supporter, let's say, in short, of the, or let's say supporter, or he doesn't address or talk about, talk to the issues of Sikhs, or even associate with Sikhs in the past, from my understanding. With this advisory commission, what sort of a boost is this to Sikhs in North America?
What the Advisory Commission does is it really gives us a chance to have a bit, and I'll circle, underscore, highlight the word, a bit more influence on the inside of the White House. So when there are issues in the community, for example, I went over some of the TSA issues, there's a direct line now to staff at the White House to complain, and then they are now then in turn going ahead to the TSA and questioning them. So for example, a few months ago we started complaining that every Sikh Dastar would have to be searched, still need to be searched. We would have complained, the TSA would respond, and there'd be a back and forth between us and the TSA. Maybe we'd enlist the help of Congress and they would get involved. Maybe we'd enlist the help of the media and try to get good media articles. In this instance, what's happened this year is we've complained. I've also contacted the White House about this, and so next week the TSA is meeting with a representative from the White House to explain themselves to them and get a sense so that the White House can understand the necessity of these policies. Are they really necessary? So what the commission does is it gives us a voice on the inside. For example, similarly, when the president decided not to go to Darbar Sahib when he was in India, obviously I raised a big ruckus on the inside. I have direct access to one of his cabinet secretaries who then will relay these complaints to the president. Now, obviously, he didn't change his schedule, but the fact that we can have that quickly direct access to complain about these issues means that we have more of a voice. What I would say is that what we really need is not just one person in one commission with relatively little power. We need 20 to 30 to 40 to 56 who are appointed to these positions by the administration to sort of really start moving things. And that's the way it is in the African American and Jewish community. They have literally dozens to hundreds of people in these positions that I'm in. Our community only has one right now. It's a start, but we have a long way to go. So what does it do for us? We get a bit of a voice that we never had before and some influence we've never had before. But is it nearly enough? Of course not. We need a lot more.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Virji. We have Harvinder Singh from the audience who is asking, how can we get that amount of funding needed? And what is a Sikh Coalition doing today or has been working on to get that amount or get that funding as of today? What may be your future plans of expanding on that?
Well, I'll be honest. In terms of the Sikh Coalition's funding, this was a treading water year. We've doubled our budget and staff for the 3 years of 2006, 2008. 2006, 2007, 2008. 2009 we had an incremental increase in staff, and then 2010 we had to maintain a steady state. The plan is to maintain a steady state again this year, and then our methodology for growing has always been we usually will convince funders in the non-Sikh foundation community to support particular projects. And once they support projects and make commitments to supporting the project for a few years, we'll then go back to the community by delivering some value through those projects and say, can you permanently fund this? Can you see the value in doing this? So much of our growth has been sort of sparked by this sort of angel investing in certain projects, and then we take that investment, hopefully deliver on the project, and then go back to the community and ask them to sort of maintain that growth. But that's really the way we've been doing it, and it's unfortunately not fast enough. And let me also say this. As a strategy, the Sikh Coalition has done something that's different than most nonprofits our size. Most nonprofits tend to rely on the foundation community for their growth and their sustenance. We decided to rely on mostly the Sikh community for our survival. So over 70% of our funds come from the Sikh community. And the reason for that is it's our sort of humble submission that we shouldn't be existing unless the community actually sees value in what we're doing. And if they don't, we don't want the whims of a non-Sikh foundation officer to guide whether the community's issues move forward. It should be the Sikh community that's deciding it. So I think, at the end of the day, our plans for growth are dependent mostly on the Sikh community, mostly whether the community understands that this is important and works towards it. But it's really an uphill battle, and we've been doing it for 10 years, and frankly, I'm a bit tired. But we're trying our best and maintaining our Charity Law spirit as much as we can, and hopefully the community over the years will understand the importance of this work, and I think it will happen. We've grown tremendously over the last 10 years.
Virji, I want to personally thank you for the work that the Sikh Coalition has been doing, because I was always looking to know who was responsible for my my experience at the airport, because I travel a lot for business and I have not had even one bad experience with respect to my turban and I was always wondering how they knew about how to approach a Sikh and how to speak to me, and I'm happy to share with yourself with the team today, with the audience, that personally I perhaps in the last 8 years I have been to the U.S. over 100 times from Canada here, and I have to say that they were well informed. They always approached me with respect at post 9/11, and I was surprised that they would have the information that they did clearly as a result of your and the organization efforts. The next question is coming from Guramrit Tatla, and the question is Sikh Coalition funding coming from Gurdwaras? If not, is Sikh Coalition making an effort to reach Gurdwaras for funding?
Some of our funding comes from Gurdwaras, but not, I wouldn't say it would be a very small portion comes from the Gurdwaras themselves. Some of the challenges that we've found we have made attempts, and there are a few Gurdwaras in the United States that give us monthly recurring donations, but the challenges we tend to find with Gurdwaras are that the Gurdwaras, the bedrock pillar of the community, the number one most important institution in the community, have many competing obligations. Oftentimes, for example, the Gurdwara where I grew up in Glen Rock, New Jersey, right now we're expanding the Gurdwara. There's a $2.5 million expansion, and that obviously makes it a bit tougher for us to fundraise at that Gurdwara in New Jersey. Similarly, the Gurdwara in Bridgewater, New Jersey, which is the next closest one, just finished their expansion about 6 months to a year ago. The Gurdwara in Lawrenceville, New Jersey, is trying to raise money for has been raising money for their expansion of their parking lot. So the Gurdwaras tend to have competing, very important competing projects that they need to pay for. The other challenge with the Gurdwaras has been this: even when we've been able to get some Gurdwaras to give us money on a regular basis, or just allow us to speak at the Divan and ask for support from the Sangat, when the management of the Gurdwara changes, we then have to sort of re-engage the new management and figure out how best to approach them and make relations to them. Sometimes the new management didn't like the previous management, and if the previous management supported us, then they might not like us because the previous management supported us. So it's just a bit more complicated and challenging, but it is important, though, to go to the Gurdwara because it is the number one institution, and we're trying our level best, but we do face some of these obstacles that I've outlined here.
You made a very important point, which is that we are always wary of a non-Sikh guiding sort of the needs of the communities, especially with respect to just our Bana, and especially we want control of what our issues are, and we want to manage it ourselves. However, my question to yourself would be, I would like to sort of submit to you for some feedback, would be, how about sort of alliances with bigger organizations such as NAACP, which is a civil rights organization for ethnic minorities in the U.S., not knowing and being an expert or knowing even sort of in any level in depth of what they stand for. Just from a cursory overview, superficially, I understand them to be a sort of an organization for all ethnic minorities and colored people, and the Jewish organizations are very strong. There must be some sort of an interface we can have with them. Do we already do this to some extent in your experience?
Virji, great question. Yeah, we actually have no choice but to work with these organizations. They have much more power and resources than us, and if on some of our issues, if it's the Sikhs alone raising the issue, it's not going to move forward. And so on some of our biggest campaigns, the Army campaign, where we're trying to make sure that the biggest employer in the U.S. Just accepts Sikhs fully without discrimination, the TSA campaign, where we want to make sure that if there is a need even to do a basic, very respectful search of the Dastar, that there'd be a good reason for it. On those campaigns, we've enlisted the active support of groups like the NAACP, the Jewish Anti-Defamation League, and the like. There'll always be, you know, to be honest, you know, these organizations, when they not necessarily, you know, we're going to have to very actively show how our issues affect their whole broader constituency. And when we're able to do that, then they tend to invest more resources. But nobody's going to invest as many resources into our issues as us. But, you know, do we build these alliances? Yes, very actively. And, you know, the list of groups we've worked with in the last year, and I just did this for a foundation application, so I know it's over 60 organizations that in some way we've collaborated with across the country, mostly in New York, California, and D.C., where we have offices.
Okay. So with respect to the in the media, to have sort of a presence in the mainstream media, from your experience, and I mean, this is 2011 now, and it's as little as it ever was in terms of a Sikh with a Dastar being sort of either shown in a magazine, perhaps in a video, or in ads, or even just sort of the federal or government sort of agencies where they sort of put together you know, pictures of immigrants coming to the U.S., perhaps in Canada. You don't see very easily the starred serpent, Sardar, or and such. So from your experience, you think that there are specific sort of things that we could do to make that more, to change that in the coming year, in the next years?
You know, Virji, maybe what I'm going to say is will be a bit controversial with my colleagues at the Sikh Coalition and the whole team, but you know, the Sikh Coalition does have an education program. We're the only organization with a staff member who's dedicated to thinking about the issues that you've just raised full time. So we have one person who thinks about it. But to be honest, when I think about it, look, the staff of the coalition, the leadership, the board, and the like, our real expertise is in legal and advocacy work. And it's not in communications work. So, you know, over time, whether it's within the Sikh Coalition or it's another organization, whatever it is, we're actually going to have to attract professionals who are passionate about media, imaging, communications work, attract a board of directors who's passionate about or has experience in media, communications, education work, and build out, either whether it's within the Sikh Coalition or another organization, sort of a real muscle. You know, I can say with confidence that the core staff of the Sikh Coalition are either lawyers or have some sort of advocacy experience that make them, you know, as good as anybody out there in what they do. I can't say the same for that existing in the Sikh community when it comes to media, communications, and the like. I'm sure those professionals are out there in our community. We just haven't attracted them to this work full-time in a dedicated way like we have with the legal and advocacy work at the Sikh Coalition. So am I being a bit critical of my organization? Perhaps I am. Or am I being self-reflective? Yes, obviously. You know, I'm saying that I would argue that we don't even know what we don't know when it comes to how to do this work right over the next, you know, decades, because this education work is really a decades-long project. And I'm waiting for those professionals in the community to stand up and say, I'm ready to take this on full time and make this my job, and make sure that when somebody sees a Sikh, they say, that's a follower of Guru Nanak. Guru Nanak Dev Ji believed in equality for everyone. That's a Sikh. That's a follower of Guru Gobind Singh Ji, and Guru Gobind Singh Ji stood up for the rights of everyone. I am so happy to have this person in my midst. I love Sikhs.
Excellent
We need
answer.
those professionals who think about those questions to do this work full time, and we don't have that yet. You know, and I really think that's the solution. It's nice that the Sikh Coalition is doing a bit of this work, but eventually we're going to have to attract the right professionals to do it the right way.
That's an excellent answer. Thank you very much for that sort of even a direction in terms of how to move forward and how to focus and how to develop and groups and organizations and how we can sort of address the different issues with lots of focus and through professionals. While I ask of the audience if they have any questions, we still have some time, not much, but if you would like to speak with Amardeep Singh, have comments or a question and you'd like to speak on the mic, simply let us know through the questions panel. We'd be happy to do that for you. In the meantime, I'm going to again go back to the Sikh Coalition because there's so much there, and it would be great to know from the man himself, perhaps, what are the top, let's say, 3 or 5 issues that you have, the organization has, that you are working on for this coming year, and how can the community help you, help the organization?
Well, in terms of, I'll use the top 3 issues. The top 3 issues, I think number 1 is this Army issue. I'm sure a lot of people are aware that Congress passed a bill and the President signed into law allowing gays in the military and freely. And when that bill was signed, Barney Frank, who's a very famous old-time gay congressman from Boston, said, the reason why this is important is that in America, if you can serve in the military, you can have any job you want. And so I think the same applies with the Sikh instance, the fact that our military can deny us a job that we know is completely irrational based on the fact that we've been the world's greatest warriors, throughout our history, is, extremely troubling. And let me just say, I was actually had the privilege, and the very humble honor of attending the graduation ceremony of Simranpreet Singh Lamba, one of our clients. And I ended up walking into the mall with him after his graduation, and he was wearing his uniform. And we had to stop literally every few steps because somebody wanted to come up to him and get his autograph and thank him for his service. And they were all aware that he was, the first Sikh to graduate from basic training as an enlisted soldier in over 30 years. So, this piece is very important for our community. We need to get this general rule that bars Sikhs from service completely overturned, and I hope we can do it while this president's in office, because I think he's probably going to be as friendly as a president as we'll ever have on this issue. And then the second issue is our education work in the state of Texas. Some of you might have heard that the Board of Education there has agreed to include information on Sikhs in the mandatory curriculum, that all 4.8 million students in Texas will learn about Sikhs sometime during, or at least in this case multiple times during their education in Texas. Once the board has agreed to it, that's just sort of the end of the beginning, not the end of the fight. We now have to go to textbook manufacturers who sell textbooks to Texas, and for each of those manufacturers we have to pay what information they're going to include on Sikhs and how they're going to include it. And then those textbook manufacturers will go back to the state, and in 3 years the state will start. So, part of our big work that they have good information on Sikhs there. And I'd add that Texas, as the largest purchaser of books outside of California, has a huge influence on national textbook manufacturers, because those manufacturers tend to shape their textbooks around what the big states want. So if we get information on Sikhs into these textbooks because of Texas, it very well might translate to the rest of the country. So it's a big deal. It's a really big deal. I mean, it's one thing for a parent to go into a school system and make a presentation on the Sikh. It's another for every school teacher to have to do that to some extent when a kid is in school and learning. So that's our second big project for the year, is working on this thing. And then our third project is something that we haven't announced, but you guys are the first hearing about it. It is something that's going to happen this summer. we're starting a first ever advocacy training institute, and this goes to your last question, Nurinder. We have made a goal this year as a pilot of inviting and selecting 15 Sikhs from around the country to come for a week to Washington, D.C. Sikh grass advocacy technique, and then we will limited invitations pilot line.
Virgio, could you please repeat that last part because of audio problems? Could you please repeat, because very important information is getting lost. Could you kindly repeat the last part, please?
Yeah, I was just going to say that was the last part about the Advocacy Institute?
Yes, please.
The last part about the last part is, so this year for the first time, and we haven't announced it yet, this is the first time anyone's hearing about it, this summer we're going to recruit 15 Sikhs, and we're limiting it to 15 because this is a pilot project. We're going to recruit 15 Sikhs to get 1 week of training in Washington, D.C. on basic advocacy techniques that we hope they'll bring back home to their local Sanghats to use and engage the Sanghat on advocacy on Sikh issues. And then we're also going to recruit 75 online advocates who can use the internet and the web to get Sikhs to take internet actions in support of Sikh rights. And it's our hope that over 5 years we'll build a core of 100 to 150 offline grassroots advocates around the country, and 500 to 1,000 dedicated online advocates. And it's going to be our inaugural, Sikh Advocacy Training Institute. It's a way of honoring our, this year's the 10-year anniversary of the Sikh Coalition. So we're going to start this Advocacy Institute, and the hope is that we'll be able to build a group of people who can significantly enhance the capacity of what our paid staff is doing, our paid professional staff, by having a very well-trained grassroots core of people. So that's happening for the first time this year, and I'd say that's the big number 3 project for us this year, and it's probably going to be one of the ways in which grassroots community members can help us. Even if they aren't selected for the Institute, my guess is that someone in their local community will be, and that person will be engaging them, asking them to sort of take a stand, take some actions in support of the issues we're working on in Washington and the like.
What a great sort of ending to an excellent presentation. I'm inspired, and the last step, or the last point number 3 that you mentioned about the Sikh Advocacy Training Institute, that's fantastic to hear of something like this happening, and I'm really pumped to myself to be a part of something like that. And there are so many options for people who may not be able to travel there, and they can join through be online advocates, and some of the other options you mentioned. I would presume that this can be something that we can sort of get more information on from your website in the days, in the few next weeks coming up, or how will that work if we wanted to get there?
We'll probably be, the timeline we have internally is to make an announcement in the middle of the first quarter, which is basically the middle of February.
Yes.
So look out for it in the middle of February.
Very good. We are closing. We've actually we've run out of time right now, and I would like to very quickly thank Amardeep Singh. It was great to hear from you. It's an excellent presentation. I've got some feedback from the audience here. They're thanking you for an excellent, great presentation. We are very inspired. It's very inspiring, and we hope we can have you present more in the future. I would also like to thank the audience for their patience, and we had some audio issues today. I hope that it wasn't it wasn't too bad. There were some of the important points. Virji was so kind to repeat them. Please join us again in the upcoming sort of webinars. I will defer it to Gurvinder Virji now to talk about that and open up the polls for the for the surveys and such. I thank everyone. So have a great weekend and talk to you soon. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.